It's a similar way with corporations when you're talking about, are you living up to your commitment to being fair? It's not a guarantee they're going to always create fair outcomes. That's frankly impossible. It's that they're going to do all the things that highly increase the probability of getting a fair outcome.
What happens when machines make choices that shape our lives, and we can't even see how or why? As artificial intelligence powers everything from hiring to healthcare, the ethical stakes have never been higher. How could the right questions and the right safeguards turn AI from a liability into a force for good?
Welcome to Socially Conscious AI, where we explore the cutting-edge innovations transforming our world for the better and bring you conversations with the brilliant minds and ethical pioneers who are leveraging AI's power to address humanity's most important challenges. I'm Valencio Cardoso.
And I'm Roman Bercot. Today's guest, Dr. Reid Blackman, is the author of Ethical Machines and founder of Virtue, the consultancy guiding organizations like NASA and the FBI through the ethical minefields of AI. From exposing hidden bias to making ethics a practical boardroom-ready tool, Reid's mission is clear: help companies turn AI's biggest risks into their greatest assets. Stay tuned to learn how you can make your technology not just smart, but right. Reid, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on, Reid. And that's quite a background you have. And one of the things I think as a Canadian that stood out to me is that you're advising the Canadian government on AI and ethics. I'm interested to hear, can you kind of touch on what that role exactly entails and what are some of the conversations that you're part of?
When people were talking about regulating, they still are, but talking about regulating foundation models, all of the responsibility is on, say, an OpenAI or a Google or a Microsoft or an Anthropic, because the thought is these models are super powerful, it's cutting edge technology. These companies better make sure that they identify all of the risks and mitigate against those risks. And one of the things that I pointed out was, look, those are the foundation model companies, but they're foundation models. Things are built on top of them. They're embedded inside of larger products, larger solutions in various industries. So it's going to, what that model looks like in a healthcare setting and, in a diagnostic setting versus in a billing setting within healthcare versus aviation versus CPG, it's all it's going to look very different. And a lot of the risk identification and mitigation has to be done way downstream of those foundation model creators. So pointing out that kind of thing about what it looks like to actually have AI taken up by anything from a startup to a Fortune 500 company, and how that changes the risk landscape and who's responsible for identifying what and mitigating what risks. That's the kind of thing that I tried to help them understand.
It's super important to be able to zoom in and out and then be able to shift contexts and kind of highlight that to leadership so that they're kind of aware of all of the gradient of changes that happen across a given policy, because typically a lot of people think of it as black and white, right?
Yeah. They think of it as simple, there's this AI and then a company buys the AI and then they use it. And that's the whole internal supply chain. But no, it's a hell of a lot more complicated than that. And so appreciating what that actually looks like, is crucial if you're going to pass recommendations that are both, regulations that are both effective at achieving the goal of the regulations, but also don't do things like unnecessarily stymie innovation because you have a bunch of rules that are stupid and don't actually do what you want them to do anyway.
You went from being a philosophy professor to consulting with Fortune 500 companies on AI ethics. What kind of drove this transition from academia to applied ethics?
When I was a graduate student making no money as a grad student, I started a fireworks wholesaling business. This was in Connecticut. And the reason, so that business went well. It went better than expected. It still exists today. And that's a lot of years later, 25 years later, something like that. The reason that's relevant is that I became a mentor to startups within the entrepreneurship organization at the university I was a professor at, because I had this successful business going. And I looked around and I saw all these students doing cool, new, exciting shit. And I thought, I want to do something cool and new and exciting. But I love philosophy. I love ethics. I don't want to leave that. So what would it look like for me to do something cool and new and interesting, but still stay on the ethics track? And the answer was an ethics consultancy. But then I looked around to see if is there a market for that? That seems like a weird thing. Who the heck is hiring an ethics consultant? And so I looked around and didn't find anything at the time. And then, I kept doing the professor thing, research, et cetera, teaching, and kept my eyes open. And then a bunch of things happened. So there was Me Too, hashtag Black Lives Matter. There was the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And so hashtag, what was it, delete Facebook or boycott Facebook, one of those. There's all these delete Uber, boycott Facebook, all these these things going on. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. What's going on is that these companies are getting their reputation dragged through the mud on social media. They better get their ethical house in order. But they don't know how to get their ethical house in order. They don't know ethics, but I do. And so that's when I first believed that I saw a market starting to emerge. I also somehow or other, I don't really know how, but it's just sort of in the academic ether, I was hearing the alarm bells around AI and the potential societal impacts of AI. My entire adult life was all about being a philosophy professor. That's like from the time I was 18 and I sort of quote unquote found philosophy, I was obsessed with it, that I wanted to get a PhD and I wanted to be a professor. And when you're in grad school, you're taught that either you're a professor, you're a tenured professor at a university, or you failed. And so it was a big deal to be like, you know what? It's not failure. It's just not what I want anymore. I want this other thing because of all the dots that you just mentioned. And so, so it was good.
One of the things, like when looking into you, and one of the things you talk about is cultural kindism, right?
Oh,
how does this philosophical foundation inform your approach to AI ethics?
I don't think that it does. Yeah, so I mean, you really dug deep there. So yeah, my dissertation was called Cultural Kindism. Then there was a colon and something after the colon, but I don't really remember what. But it was breathtakingly good. And then my subsequent research was informed by my dissertation. I mean, that was a view. When I was a professor, I was really focused on foundational questions in ethics. So is there such a thing as being ethically good and bad? Could you hold literally incorrect views, which is to say false views about what's ethically good and bad and right and wrong? You've got a view about what constitutes a life worth living or a good life. Could you just be wrong about it? Could you just get it all wrong?
Yeah.
And if so, how could you get it wrong? How could there be ethical truths? What the hell does that mean? How could you know the ethical truths? And so cultural kindism, as I called it in the dissertation, was a view trying to say, look, here's how you could think about ethics in a way that's objective, that you could be correct and incorrect about what constitutes a good life or what it is to live well or what's morally right and wrong. And I was trying to create a framework for that sort of thing. So extremely abstract ethics. It's called meta-ethics, META-ethics. It's not really connected to the work that I do now. There's a way in which it is and there's a way in which it's not. The way in which it is, I'll start with, is that a lot of people have really weird views about ethics, and they come to the AI ethics space with a bunch of false assumptions about what ethics is, and then that leads them to making weird claims about how we ought to proceed in terms of how do we bring AI ethics to a Fortune 500 company or something along those lines. So I think that if you don't have the expertise, it's easy to misunderstand what ethics is about, at least from an academic perspective, and then go about trying to apply it in this really misguided way. And so I get to avoid those things. But when it comes to, okay, let's create the framework, the infrastructure, the resources, the training, again, you're never teaching people like ethics 101 or AI ethics 101 or academic philosophy or academic ethics. That's just not going to be helpful. So it's more like the expertise goes a long way in clearing out the wrong paths as opposed to defining exactly what the right path is.
But AI is essentially being developed in the hands of just a few mega corporations. As you were saying, it creates this this global monoculture of what AI should do, does do. There's not like a nuanced look at ethics. And so I was just curious, to what degree can we develop responsible AI that's going to have an appropriate ethical framework based on individual cultures? The frame of reference being something like GDPR, right? You have like one nation or set of nations that agrees on this legal framework that says, oh, you have to give customers the right to be forgotten. and then that makes, the business application of that hard everywhere else, because now you've got, a different set of, values being enforced in one territory. So I was just kind of curious, if you had reflections on that as far as like how to apply ethical AI within a specific context rather than just as this one monolith.
There's just an ethical claim. And the ethical claim is something like, you should release AI that is respectful of different cultures, something along those lines. I think that's the kind of thing that you're getting at, that there's different cultures, we're going to develop AI, but if only one, if the AI comes out of one particular culture, then we're worried about, in some broad sense, biased AI that sort of speaks to the culture from which it sprang, as opposed to other cultures as well. That worry gives rise to that ethical or normative claim. You ought to develop AI in such a way that it's respectful of different cultures. Okay. Then the question is, okay, well, how the hell do you do that?
Right.
And look, there's lots of different things to say on this front, because look, really you're asking, and this is the like the philosopher in me saying, who's going to go like structural. You're just asking a more general claim, which is, for any ethical claim that we make, you should respect people's privacy. You should respect different people's cultures. You should not manipulate people in such a way that it undermines their autonomy. You should blah, 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 blah. There's just a whole bunch of stuff that you should and shouldn't do. How do we take any of those claims and build them into how we develop and deploy AI? Okay. But now there's lots of things to say, because different people are going to have different responsibilities on that front. Right? So the data collectors and the people who clean the data might have some set of responsibilities. The people who think, oh, let's even build this AI in the first place for this particular purpose, they have responsibilities to integrate it into what the design of it looks like. Then there's the building of it. Then there's the testing of it. There's setting thresholds, let's say we're talking about, narrow or predictive or traditional AI. Then there's the people who are going to actually use it. Let's now talk about LLMs for a second. How are they going to prompt it? Might they prompt it in such a way that's going to lead to, say, outputs that discriminate or are biased against a particular culture or subpopulation, something along those lines. Mm-hmm. Then you've got the executives who are overseeing the development of AI. They have responsibilities. Hey, did you make sure to incorporate that principle of respect for all cultures into each stage of the AI lifecycle? So they've got responsibility. So it's not like, oh, here's the thing to do. There's so many people involved in different ways for how AI actually creates certain kinds of outcomes in conjunction with the dozens, hundreds, thousands of people that interact with that model in some way or other, that you just have to think about what are the responsibilities for each one of those people in order for us to get AI that doesn't discriminate against particular cultures. Yeah. Does that answer your question, or is that too much of a ramble?
No, I think it's actually very helpful that, there's not just one simple answer. And I have, generally seen these conversations framed as, we need ethical AI principles. And you've said that most companies have bullshit AI principles. So yeah. I'm curious, like, what makes the difference between something that's actually, just like performative ethics versus something that's actually going to be helpful and maybe help manage risk?
The way that most companies articulate their principles is at an extremely high level, and they sort of stop there. So they say, we're for fairness, we're for transparency, we're for accountability, we're for blah, blah. It's like, and it's sort of like, no kidding. Everyone's for that. I mean, at that higher level, I like to point, no one ever likes when I point this out, but I don't know why. I think it's a good point. The KKK says they're for fairness. You read their charter, and I have, like, they're for fairness. You dig into what they mean by that, or what implementation of fairness looks like, and it's very different from what I think you and I think of it. But at that higher level, anyone can sign up for it, which means that it's useless. It means it's not actionable. So the way that my team and I do it with clients is, we'll let them choose some principles, but they're also choosing amongst a menu of procedures that go along with it. So you don't get to choose a value without telling me what the procedures are that live with it. So to give you a very, very obvious or very obvious, tiny example, if you say you're for fairness, you don't want biased AI, then perhaps you're going to commit to the following. We will check for potentially discriminatory outputs at each stage of the AI lifecycle. That's just a mini one. But that's something. We're getting somewhere. We'll identify potentially discriminated against stakeholders at each stage of the AI lifecycle. We will mitigate the risks of biased or discriminatory outputs at each stage of the AI lifecycle. So you're beginning to, it's only the beginning, but you're beginning to put some color on what you mean when you say, yeah, we're for fairness. Think about a fair criminal justice system, or a trial in particular. For it to be a fair trial is for it to be the case that the trial unfolded along certain procedures, right? The jury was selected in a certain way, the trial was conducted in a certain way, the person had an opportunity to avail themselves of a lawyer. The lawyer could say, I object, and the judge can say sustained or overruled or whatever. They might not get the right answer at the end of that, right? Our criminal justice system is not perfect. Even if everyone acts with good intentions, you can get innocent people being found guilty and guilty people being found innocent because the system's imperfect. But it's a just, or it's a fair trial on the condition that it proceeded along with those in the way that they're supposed to proceed. It's a similar way with corporations when you're talking about, are you living up to your commitment to being fair? It's not a guarantee they're going to always create fair outcomes. That's frankly impossible. It's that they're going to do all the things that highly increase the probability of getting a fair outcome. Just like criminal justice systems are fair because they follow procedures that increase the probability of coming to a fair outcome. The innocent are found innocent, the guilty are found guilty.
I think the criminal justice example is a very helpful analogy to say, like, we can tell procedurally whether or not something was in fact fair. Applying that to your company, how do you know that you did the thing you said you were going to?
I can solve for 80% of the use cases, and there's always going to be this 20% that falls into that outside bucket that are going to get negatively impacted potentially. And we try to minimize as much of that impact as possible, right?
Yeah. When people say, like, how do we make sure that it's culturally respectful? This is sort of going back to the earlier question that you asked, Roman. How do we make sure that it's culturally respectful? There's this really sort of feel-good answer that's kind of dumb, which is we have to have the people who are going to be impacted have to be represented in the design of the AI. And it's sort of like, really? Okay, first of all, how are you going to how are you going to slice up all the stakeholder groups? Are we going to go like, we're just going to get one person for Southeast Asia? Are we going to get, like, do we need one for Vietnam and one for, Cambodia? Do we need a man and a woman? Do we need men and women from different age groups within Vietnam and Cambodia and China? Like, who's hiring all these people? Who's paying for all these people? How long is it going to take to get all these people in a room? Like, forget it. And so it feels nice to be like, oh, everyone should have a voice in how they're going to be impacted by AI, but it's not plausible. So the realistic question is, given that we've got limited time and resources, and we're a team of X amount of people, how can we do the due diligence that we need to do to be respectful of different cultures? And maybe that requires doing some stakeholder interviews. Maybe it requires bringing in a subject matter expert. Maybe it requires blah, 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 blah. But you're just not going to get a team that's so diverse that it represents all the cultures going to impact. That's not plausible.
I understand you wrote a recent article in Harvard Business Review that warns about organizations not being ready for agentic AI. Like, are there any, what do you feel are like the specific risks that companies could be potentially missing?
I mean, it's sort of all the old risks just amplified or just new paths. So, one thing that I like to point out is when we talk about the ethical risks of AI, we're not talking about, it's the old risks. It's just new ways of doing it, right? So discrimination, that sort of predates AI. We just found new and exciting ways to do it and at scale. Privacy violations existed well before AI. We just found new ways to do it at scale. So it's not like it's new risks. It's more like it's new ways of realizing those risks. But they do happen at scale, which is one of the problems. So when you've got, an AI discriminating in a hiring capacity, let's say, you get discrimination at scale. It's not like you've got this one discriminatory hiring manager. You've got this one that impacts thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are applying to the job. So when there's a scale issue, the thing about AI agents is that they act in all sorts of ways that you can't predict. I mean, that's kind of what makes them so powerful, is that they're indeterministic. You don't give them the exact instructions to follow. You give them the goal and they figure out the means to the end. But there's so many ways that things can go sideways, from hallucinations to access to data that it shouldn't have, to turns out there are systemic risks. So the AI agent itself, if you like, is sort of on the ethical up and up. It connects to another generative AI that is not on the ethical up, it hasn't gone through an ethical due diligence, and so then things go sideways. Or maybe both of them have gone through a due diligence, but something about the way they interact with each other creates new risks or creates a new path to familiar risks. So there's so many moving parts when it comes to agents. The way that I like to put it, or the way that I put it in the article is, we're sort of at what I call stage one now. Maybe you've got an LLM and you connect it to, one or two other things. Maybe you connect it to one other tool. Maybe you connect it to a narrow AI. Maybe you connect it to a narrow AI in a database. Like, hey, agent, I want you to go to the database of resumes, get all the resumes, put them through the narrow AI to score those resumes, and tell me what the top 5 are and why. And then it goes off and it does that, and that's cool. That's amazing. But, when you've got an agent that's connected to 5 generative AIs, 50 databases, 35 narrow AIs, the freaking internet, with all the information, the biased, crazy, false information that you find on the internet, other tools, how do you get there's so many nodes of interaction and so many places where things could go wrong. You've got this really tough question. Okay, you can't do a risk assessment at every single node of interaction with these systems. It's too many. It's impossible. Let alone the subset of each of the overall set of the superset. So you can't do, like, ideally in an ideal world at infinite time. You do a risk assessment of model 1, model 2, model 3, the system that is model 1 and model 2, the system that is model 1 and 3, and then 2 and 3, and then 1, 2, and 3. Okay, but who's got time for this, right? We'll all be dead. So you've got this substantive question. Given all the nodes, given all the places of interaction among all these tools, all these pieces of software, all this moving data, all these databases, blah, 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 who should be performing what risk assessment at what point, and how should they do it? You can't do them all. So where's the biggest bang for our buck, such that it's compatible with our risk appetite? Once you've got, that's an insanely complicated system. Call that the agent. And that's all, like, pieces of its brain, if you like, that it's got other pieces of its brain that it's connected to. Now have it go talk to another agent with all its complexity. That's a disaster in terms of minefield and risk complexity. Now go have it talk to an agent that's external to your organization, where you don't get to do any kind of risk assessment of that third-party agent. How are you? This is a hard problem. No one has a clear answer to it yet. I mean, there's not the answer, but it's answers. But we don't have tools for monitoring all of this craziness. And people talk about a human in the loop being sort of the safeguard. But if you give a human in the loop, hey, this is an AI agent. It's connected to 50 databases, 30 narrow AIs, blah, blah, and it tells you this is the way to go. You should zig and not zag. And then says, hey, human, am I good to go? How is the human supposed to evaluate that? It's like a billion data points. I don't know. Yes? No? I had no clue. So human in the loop totally breaks down. We have no monitoring capacities, and things get worse from there. But I'll shut up. That's why agents are so complicated.
Probably the safest way to approach that, even is from the ground up, right? When you are actually designing the agent themselves, right? And the people who are responsible for designing these. And then almost like taking it like in steps at a time, right? Like,
yep.
Build this piece, test it, and then scale it to the next thing. Because as you keep adding more to this workflow, like you mentioned, like things like as soon as you go external, observability becomes hard, right?
Yeah. And not only do you want to sort of do the risk assessments in phases, in steps, as you said, but also the deployment, right? So you don't just sort of say, like, okay, green light, have at it, have at the world. No, there's still got to be milestones. You can think about it as it has to earn trust. And so you say, okay, you can do this stuff. You can do this many actions, and then you got to check in with me. You can do this many transactions, and you got to check in with me. We're going to deploy, but we're only going to deploy in this very limited context. And then we'll slowly think about what's the next phase of deployment. How do we scale it slowly, if you like. So it's going to get to scale, ideally, if things go well. But what does it look like to slowly roll it out with checkpoints?
Shifting things to like the government level, right? Like, and regulation, like, do you see that evolving, like, from managing like agentic AI risks, like, or just continuing to amplify the problem?
Devolving? Government I don't think has a grip on this at all. No. The sort of biggest quote unquote hope is that it's the states, not the federal government. The federal government, forget about it. Not in the U.S. anyway. We're not going to see anything. Nothing substantive. I think we'll see some stuff from states. I still think that there's a lot of lack of understanding and appreciation for what the technology is and how it gets used. In fact, the same problem that I pointed out earlier when I was working with the Canadian government, You think that most state people who are states in the state legislatures, they're familiar with exactly what agentic AI is and what the risk landscape is and how it unfolds. I mean, think about the risk assessments that have to be done for just an LLM. Right? There's you can look at training data, blah blah blah, but then there's you can do a risk assessment before you fine tune and after you fine tune, before you add adapters and after you add adapters. There's all sorts of ways, as you know, of altering, of modifying a foundation model. And it can get that same model can get passed around within an organization and get modified in different ways. So this department adds this adapter, that other department adds this other adapter. Anyway, this is just me saying there's so many things that you can do with a foundation model, and there's so many places to do risk assessments, and there's so many different contexts of deployment, and there's so many places where it's the enterprise, it's the company that's using it that is responsible for this risk identification, not the foundation model company like an OpenAI or Microsoft or Google. And other times it's like, no, it's upstream. It really is those foundation model. You got to get a grip on that stuff. And I don't have any confidence that government has enough grip on that.
Our show is socially conscious AI. We specifically wanted to make a show about, people who are using AI to do good things in the world. You've said before that you reject both the AI doom and gloom, but you also talk about not falling into naive techno optimism. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what's your, I guess, mental model of how people who would like to use AI for good, how should we be thinking about, taking a realistic view of AI?
The doom and gloom stuff strikes me as mostly silly. I've never seen an argument where I'm like, oh yeah, everything's going to hit the fan. Like we're in trouble. There's what most arguments of that form look like are, it's possible that X and it's possible that Y and it's possible that Z, and if X and Y and Z happen, then we're all dead. And it's sort of like, okay, true, but I want to talk about probabilities, not possibilities. Possibility is cheap. Possibility is super cheap. Like, it's possible that 5 minutes from now, a bird is going to fly into the window that's closest to you. It's possible. Not probable. You have no evidence for it. So I find claims about what's possible extremely unimpressive, and I want to hear what's the probability. And if the probability is 0.0001 for X and for Y and for Z, I'm really not staying up late at night worried about the future of humanity. So I think the sort of doom and gloom stuff is for the most part silly. Is that right? Do I think it's silly? I've yet to see an argument that's not particularly silly. For the optimism stuff, there's just a massive overestimation of whether I think that it comes from a lack of understanding of what people do, let's say in their jobs, right? So AI is going to take over all the things that we do. Sort of like, I don't think you know what people do. You think that everything that people do is just a sort of a matter of a list of tasks. And that's just not true. So, just to give one example, it's a lot of, politically maneuvering, working with other people, collaborating, satisfying different stakeholders, blah, 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 blah. So I think there's a lot to say work that doesn't involve just performing some task. I also think they have sort of really silly views about what constitutes intelligence. So they think a lot of times, intelligence just is a matter of doing tasks. It's like, that's a weird way to think of intelligence. So part of it is that I think they have a silly view of the philosophy of mind, what the nature of intelligence is, such that they overestimate what this thing is going to be capable of, what AGI even looks like. I think they just get that completely wrong, and so that they're misconceiving what we are. Or they think about, the brain is just a computer, and these are computers. So, we'll just make a more powerful computer, and then the human computer is going to be outmatched. But thinking about our brains or our minds as computers is misguided. They're not mechanistic like that. Yes, there's analogies with like convolutional neural networks, and we have neural networks, but we also have things like neurochemicals like serotonin and dopamine. That has a role in how our mind works. We have hormones like testosterone and estrogen. Those things play a role in how our minds work. So our mind is way more complicated than neural networks. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but this is just me saying I'm not so optimistic because I think that people who are optimistic in the sense of AI is going to just be unbelievably intelligent and solve all our problems, I think they have a silly view about what human intelligence looks like, let alone something like wisdom.
Do you geek out, as a philosopher on things like, does AI, have consciousnness? How would we know if it's conscious? Like, is that stuff you get into, or you stay more on the practical side?
I'm into it, but I've yet this. I mean, then I think we get into even more silliness because, hey, look, there's a whole area in philosophy called philosophy of mind. I published a little bit in philosophy of mind. I taught philosophy of mind to undergraduates, so I wouldn't call myself an expert in philosophy of mind in the way that some of my friends are, but I know plenty. And the people who are making these claims about sentience and consciousness and stuff like that, they're like first year students in the first semester of an introduction to philosophy class where we're in the subsection on the philosophy of mind. And they're saying the kinds of things that students at that level say. And it's just sort of like, okay, that's cute. Now let's do the real stuff. Now it's time for class. Right? Let's let class start so you can say things that are less ridiculous. So, I don't get worked up about it because I think I think their claims are silly. And to the extent that we do have questions about what is the nature of intelligence and what is it to understand something, like philosophers of mind have been talking about this stuff for decades. So it's not new to philosophers at all.
Yeah.
Before we close out, Reid, I just want to ask you, like, what is one idea or takeaway you hope our listeners can walk away with after hearing this conversation?
Here's the takeaway. Yeah, the technology is awesome. I use it all the time. I think it's great. But it's also a very complicated landscape. And instead of paying attention to just like this way of things going ethically bad or that way of things going ethically bad, I think trying to zoom out a little bit and trying to pay attention to what's the overall risk landscape here and why might things go wrong is more helpful, at least for me, for thinking about, okay, how should I use this thing in this context versus that context?
I think you've mentioned like your podcast, we mentioned your books, your workshops. Where's sort of the best place for folks to learn more about what you're doing and stay connected to your work?
There's reidblackman.com, there's virtueconsultants.com, there's reidblackman.substack.com, there's LinkedIn. I don't know. Google me, you'll find me.
And your incredibly cool podcast, Ethical Machines.
Yes, and the podcast, Ethical Machines. There you go.
Thanks for joining us for Socially Conscious AI with our guest, Reid Blackman. If this discussion sparked new insights for you, we'd love for you to subscribe and join our community of AI optimists. And if you know someone navigating the complex world of ethical and sustainable AI, share this episode. It might be exactly what they need. For Valencio Cardoso, I'm Roman Bercot. Until next time, stay curious, stay conscious.